I know that for all of us as teachers, it's a challenge to address a group right after lunch. And it's even worse when it involves a Turkish professor. I don't know if you've heard about our breed, but we have a reputation to go on for a bit, usually in a drone. There is a story of a Turkish professor who is here in DC at a conference, and he's given. Incidentally, you haven't mentioned how much time I have, so this could be dreadful. Was it 45 minutes? Okay. And he's given less than that, but he goes on for half an hour, and people are beginning to gently drift out of the conference hall, and at the end he's left just with one person listening with some attention, and he realizes he has to conclude and wrap up his topic. He does so and then walks up to this person and say, thank you for your interest, what is the reason? And he says, well, I'm the next speaker. So what I'd like to do today is the topic is obviously a vast one, but cover Turkish Republican history from its foundation to roughly to today, focusing mostly on political and foreign policy developments. But maybe before I get started, let me say that we have at the Transatlantic Academy, which is based in the German Marshall Fund, just completed our report, which is Getting to Zero, Turkey, its Neighborhood and the West. The zero is a take on the Turkish foreign minister, who's also a professor of international relations and likes to talk about, taking on his notion of zero problems with Turkey's neighbors. And I suspect you're well aware that that policy is meeting some challenges. I will leave a copy of the report with you, Heidi, and it is also available on the net through either transatlanticacademy.org, or I think if you just were to write Getting to Zero, it probably would come up. Heidi mentioned that I'm from what we call Boğaziçi University. I know the soft G and the G with the cedilla is a challenge for English speakers. But my university, which you can see the campus there, might be of some interest to you because it's the continuation of the first American college that was set up outside the United States in 1863 and was called until 1971 Robert College. And Robert College was then set up by Cyrus Hamlin, who was no less than the brother of Hannibal Hamlin. I need not examine you on that, I suspect, the vice president of Abraham Lincoln. And I did have an occasion to visit Richmond with my family, which I found to be a very pretty and fascinating city. And it was only during the visit of the Civil War Museum that it suddenly dawned upon me that this college was set up right in the midst of the Civil War in the United States. In a way, it very much puzzled me that something like this could have been pulled off at the time when the U.S. was going through difficult times. There is a vast literature on Turkey, the Republican history. Here I listed 3 sources that you might find of interest should you wish to go a little bit deeper. Reşat Kasaba is a historian based at Washington University in Seattle and has edited this volume. It has lots of chapters. I have one on precisely immigration issues, but you can find a very good chapter on the last days of the Ottoman Empire, the early days of the Republic, as well as many issues such as the Kurdish problem, social issues, etc. Ersin Kalaycıoğlu is a prominent political scientist who does a lot of work on elections and public opinion polls. His book is sort of a general political science analysis of Turkey since its establishment. Andrew Mango, on the other hand, is a fascinating personality. He is the descendant of what we call a Levantine family, partly of Greek origin, partly of Italian origin, based in the Ottoman Empire. He speaks a bit of a heavy but very good Turkish. He's well into his 80s, and he wrote this book on Atatürk that dates from, as you might suspect, 2003, not 203. If I had to choose amongst any of these books or any other book on Turkey, I would highly recommend this. Andrew Mango is some personality on his own. I thought I'll get started with a historical map to give you an idea about the extent to which the Ottoman Empire went into the hearts of Europe. They came, as you know, very close to capturing Vienna. The trauma still prevails. In 2004, when the European Commission recommended that negotiations for membership should start with Turkey, I'll come back to it, a member of the Commission of Dutch or Austrian origin, Fritz Bolkestein, made the infamous remark that admitting Turkey to membership to the European Union would make the defeat of the Ottomans at the gates of Vienna in vain. And that kind of mentality prevails, I'm afraid, in Europe of today. What had puzzled me at the time, and I suspect some of you may well be historians, is that such an approach to history, the notion of the Ottomans being Muslims and Europeans Christians, and history being a history of confrontation between the two, from my point of view, when I heard him make those remarks, didn't live up to historical reality, because as you would know, Poland disappeared in about 1795, 1790s in the hands of the Catholic Habsburgs and Protestant Hohenzollers who ruled what was then Prussia, and the Orthodox Romanov who ruled Russia. But the Ottoman Empire continued to recognize the existence of what was known for the Ottomans as Lehistan. They called the Poles Les. And Austrians are horrified when they are reminded that during the First World War, Ottoman troops were defending Habsburg or Austrian imperial territory against the Russians in Galicia. And Galicia would be just about where the border ends there in the north, where roughly Ukraine is, western parts of Ukraine is. Now, that's where I'd like to start today's presentation. The Ottoman Empire entered World War I on the side of Austria and Germany, part of the Triple Alliance at the time. And that alliance, as I'm sure you're well aware of, lost the First World War. And as a result of the Ottoman Empire and its allies, who were also Bulgaria, Hungary, Austria and Germany, these treaties were imposed on the losers. And the one that involved the Ottoman Empire was the Sèvres Treaty, drawn up just south of Paris. And what that Sèvres Treaty called for was the division of what was left of the Ottoman Empire, which was roughly the green area you see, roughly corresponding to today's Turkey, being divided up into smaller states. A Greek-dominated state in the south, an Italian-dominated state in the east, and Armenia, a Kurdish state, and the center would have been left for Turkey. I mention this because to this day the trauma of that treaty persists in Turkey, and the majority of Turkish citizens, journalists, even academics look at international relations and interpret international relations from the perspective or the thesis, the hypothesis that the West, including the US, wants to revive this treaty and divide up Turkey. We might have time to come back to it later on. But unlike with the Versailles Treaty and Germany, the treaty with Bulgaria, the Trianon Treaty with Hungary, and then also the treaty with Austria, thanks to the Turkish leader Atatürk, a Turkish resistance movement was organized, and eventually the victorious powers of the First World War were chased out of that greenish geography you saw. And as a result of it, the Lausanne Treaty was signed in 1923, and it gave birth to the Turkish Republic. So the Turkish Republic in some ways is an unusual republic because it was the international community that was its midwife. It was through a conference that eventually the birth of the Turkish Republic was sealed. This geography has dramatically changed since then to this one, and the foreign policy aspect of what I will try to cover will make some references to it. At one point, as you know, the Soviet Union dominated most of this geography, but with the collapse of it, a string of new states emerged in Turkey's neighborhood, and Turkey traditionally had conflictual relations with these countries: Cyprus, Greece, Bulgaria, Russia, Armenia, and Syria as well. And some credit goes to the current Turkish foreign minister in improving some of these relationships and at least better managing the conflicts, if not resolving them. Now, the way I'd like to go about this is to look at the era before the end of the Second World War. It's a very important turning point, and then the period since then. Very briefly, the first period, the one from 23 to the end of the Second World War, was a period during which this newly born Turkish state was constructed, to use kind of literary language, on the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. That's how often school teachers in Turkey put it. But what was significant during this period is that as this state was being built, constructed, a new national identity was being constructed, because the notion of a Turk existed in the minds of the Europeans, but in the minds of the people who lived in this geography, it didn't. People at that time thought of themselves either in terms of religious identities, Muslims, non-Muslims, or different branches of Muslims, as well as regional ethnic identities, ranging from Arabs to Kurds to we call them Caucasians. I know for you it means something different, but another term is Cherkess. That is, back in the 1860s, when Russia expanded southwards, the people living in this area fled into parts of the Ottoman Empire, and the legacy of that is that today in Israel there are 4 villages of these people inhabited, and King Abdullah's royal guards are people of that origin, Circassians or Caucasians as sometimes they're referred to. So a national identity had to be molded, what they called a modern national identity had to be molded from this religious ethnic diversity. But this was also a period when the first steps of industrialization was taken. So starting from 23 onwards, by the standards of the time, and maybe even today, very radical reforms were introduced. Reforms that would break Turkey's social and political characteristics from the Ottoman one towards a secular modern state. One was the unification of education. Robert College was spared on some legal loop, including Saint Joseph, Saint Michel, the Austrian high school, the French high school, the German high school in Istanbul. But beyond these schools, all the schools, including these madrasas of the kinds that you see references to in terms of Pakistan, for example, and minority schools were all unified into one educational system built on one language, the Turkish language, and religious personalities were stripped of their right to educate new generations. Another fascinating development was the adoption of the Swiss Civil Code. Previously, though the Ottoman Empire in the last 100 and 120 years had started to acquire secular characteristics here and there, the civil code was still very much based on the Sharia law, or on the law derived from the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet. While minorities such as the Greek, the Armenians, the Jews had their own often religiously based civil code. So all that was scrapped, and instead this Swiss civil code, actually it wasn't even the Swiss civil code, it was the civil code of a canton called Neuchâtel that was taken and simply translated and started to implement. And to this day, what probably sets Turkey apart from all other Muslim countries that I know of, with the exception of maybe Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Saddam's Iraq, and maybe a little bit Syria, it's the only country where the civil code is man-made law, it's secular, and to my knowledge it's the only country where a Christian man can marry a Muslim woman, vice versa, without having to change religion. I know that firsthand because my mom is Swiss. And much more dramatic, of course, was what this picture captures. This is Atatürk. I know it's a hazy picture there. In 1928, he led the change of script for the Turkish language from the Arabic script to the Latin script. This, as you might imagine, was a dramatic transformation or change. There were many others. I'll skip the details, but this I'd like to underline is to give you a taste of how far these reforms went in those very few years, in the early second half of the 20s and into the 30s. And as you might suspect, there was resistance, and there was violent resistance often rebellions would occur, particularly in eastern parts of Turkey where Kurds lived and to this day still live. They kind of rebelled against the reforms that undermined the religious basis of those societies, but also undermined the primacy of their identity as Kurds. And this is a period when this notion of mountain Turks, Kurds being mountain Turks, emerged, if you are familiar with the idea there. And this is also a period when in 1930-31 they adopted what was known as the Turkish history thesis. And this is why the soft G is very important. The scholars of the time developed this theory that practically everybody descended from Turks. And the basis of it was the Sun language theory. These people argued that when man emerged, emerged upright, he must have looked up and seen the sun and been impressed by it. And the sound he would have uttered would have been, ah. And that's the soft G sound. From there, including American Indians, Native Americans, became Turks. And this was strongly supported thesis, although of course when you look back at it, it sounds very comical, and it is regarded as comical. This is a period when there was a one-party system. One of the parties that to this day exists dominated the scene, and criticism had very little room. But one scholar and member of parliament who came from a very prominent Ottoman family did take, if I may say, the mickey out of this idea and made the famous remark, are you going to argue that Hannibal himself was also Turkish? He very quickly fell from favor, but his Ottoman credentials, I suspect, protected his life. His descendants to this day exist, and one of them is a young, quite prominent Turkish-American civil society activist and intellectual. Part and parcel of building this national identity is that there was emigration as well immigration in Turkey. And the issue of the Armenian genocide has to be seen in that context. Although, by and large, most of the Armenians had either been decimated or forced out of the Ottoman Empire, there nevertheless was a community of roughly 180, 200, 220,000 still existing in the Republic in those days. But this politics of making everybody Turkish and denying them their identity culminated in many of the Armenians leaving Turkey. There are about 60, 80,000 of them left. The Greeks hang on to it because of the Lausanne Treaty terms, but many of them also began to leave from the 50s onwards, and to this today it's a tiny, tiny little minority. Jews stayed on. In spite of this Gaza flotilla crisis, traditionally there has always been a very warm, close relationship between the empire and its Jewish community, as well as the Republic and its Jewish citizens. But when the Israeli state was set up, many did actually also leave. But in turn, not many people recognize this. Turkey became an immigration country, a little bit like the US, a kind of melting pot for people of Muslim and Turkish descent living in the Balkans, as well as a little bit in the Caucasus and Central Asia. Between 1923 and the mid-1990s, almost 1.7 million such people came and immigrated in Turkey. And Turkey today is just over 70 million. Then, in the 1920s, was 13 million. The wars had decimated the population, plus there had been the process of emigration as well. The economy was mostly agrarian and terribly low literacy rates, and that Atatürk argued was one of the reasons why this change in script was advocated, the argument being the Latin script is easier to learn than the Arabic script. Foreign policy, by and large, during this period was based on neutrality. For two reasons: Turkey very much saw itself as a victim and potential victim of imperialism and colonialism, so wanted to keep a distance from Western powers, but also had learned its lesson from the First World War. And I, to this day, personally feel a great gratitude to those leaders who did extract those lessons and spared Turkey from the destruction of not only fascism, but also the Second World War. Now, after the Second World War, a new world emerged, if you wish, a world that got divided into, the Western world and the Soviet world. And again, these people who had preempted Turkey from participating in the Second World War had another piece of wisdom that they partly were pushed to become a member of the Western alliance. Stalin helped very much when in the spring of 1945 he made territorial demands on Turkey, especially on the Straits where my university is located, as well as in eastern parts of Turkey. But the price, if you wish, Turkey had to pay, a little bit like today the price for wanting to join the EU, was to take some preliminary steps towards parliamentary democracy. So from 1946 onwards, Turkey has held national elections in regular intervals, and Turkey today, even though has suspect credentials in respect to being a pluralist democracy like the US or Germany for that matter, it has well-established credentials for being what they call an electoral democracy or a majoritarian democracy or parliamentary democracy. The issue of pluralism is still a problem there. But this democracy did get interrupted by military coups. The period immediately after the Second World War was also interesting because early steps towards creating a market economy was taken. Because in the 30s, the state very much dominated the economy. The United States, the Marshall Plan, straight after the Second World War, played a role. However, by the early 1960s, the decision was made a bit like Latin Americans did, like Argentina especially. Argentina was very much a kind of a reference point for Turkey of the 1960s, was to develop an import substitution economy, meaning hiding behind the high protective tax customs walls and try to initiate a domestic industry. I personally remember those years very, very well. I mean, TV, for example, didn't come to Turkey until the late 60s. And those TVs, you could not rely on them very much. Refrigerators. In the 50s, there were Westinghouse refrigerators, but the refrigerators that Turkey produced at the time, you had to be very gentle when you got hold of the handle and tried to open the doors. And as a young man, I remember the freezing unit would always bulge with ice, and you rarely had any room left to put anything to freeze in there. But today, including in the US, the Turkish industry is a major exporter of durable goods or electrical appliances, from TVs to refrigerators, etc. But that is very much a product of what happened in the 1980s. I'll briefly come back to it in a split second. Actually, the Turkish government succeeded only in the last 6 months to wedge open the American market for Turkish Ford minibuses. And you'll be seeing them. Actually, in New York, you can already see them as yellow cabs. So that's all a transformation that took place. The import substitution model collapsed in the late 70s. I remember those years. If you flew Turkish Airlines, they couldn't serve you any coffee because coffee had to be imported, and the country simply did not have foreign currency to be able to import coffee to be served on Turkish Airlines. What that led to was the arrival of the idea of liberating the market economy 10 years ahead from the collapse of the Soviet Union. And that is what puts Turkey today at an advantage in relation to its neighborhood. And I thought I had a picture of the gentleman who initiated this process, Turgut Özal, who was a very, very, very good friend of Father Bush. They had a very good rapport there. But the 80s, while the economy was being transformed to a liberal market economy, also saw the rise of the Kurdish problem, leading to massive human rights violations, violence, which is, I'm afraid, making a comeback these last few days, and it worries and concerns me personally. This is the geography where Kurds have traditionally lived, but as school teachers you might be interested to know that the Kurds themselves are not very homogeneous. The Kurds from northern Iraq here speak a language called Sorani, while many Kurds here speak Kurmanch, while another branch that goes like this speaks Zaza. And it's still not easy to communicate across these languages. But because of Turkey's developmental process, the modernization process, there was a lot of migration from rural areas into cities. The Istanbul that I saw as a teenager in the latter part of the 60s was a city of 1.5 million people. Literally an absolute jam. But today it's a city of 15 million. It's a jam in the traffic jam sense of the word. Too many people squeezed into. It's vibrant, it's dynamic, this and that, but I would always prefer the old one. In that process of modernization, there were a lot of Kurds who moved to more developed parts of Turkey, urban centers. But one important consequence of the violence in the 80s and 90s led to many Kurds being forced out of the region. So there is an important proportion of this population living now in western parts of Turkey. So to recap, during those two, in the first period, you saw these critical reforms that changed the nature of the state from the Ottoman one to the Turkish Republic, and that is really what makes, in the eyes of many American officials, politicians, European ones, Turkey special for being a modern secular state. The democracy bit came painfully after the Second World War, and it still has some distance to cover. And the return of this violence related to the Kurdish problem may challenge that process seriously. In the first period, you had an economy that was utterly agrarian with very, very, very little industry. The Ottoman Empire, once upon a time, had industry, but the British, the French, through capitulations, they call them, had infiltrated the market and destroyed that industry. So that industry had to be rebuilt. Andrew Mango, I remember telling me a story of how in the early 40s he worked on a sugar factory that was set up from scratch so that Turkey could produce its own sugar rather than import it. This is also a period when cement factories, steel factories were built. It's all this interwar era of state-run economies. Soviet Union had a lot of influence in Turkey at the time. But after the Second World War, you see a period of little bit liberalization, the return of the state-controlled, managed economy, with some industrialization taking place, that model collapsing, and a new model introduced that makes Turkey today really a unique economy in the region. A few words about foreign policy. I hope I'm not becoming the classic Turkish professor. I see some people drifting out of the room, but I hope it's just for coffee and drinks. I'll focus on the post-Second World War. Turkey became a founding member of the United Nations in 1945 in San Francisco. Also, Turkey became a member of the Council of Europe. Now you'll begin to see why Turks and the Turkish state traditionally has seen itself as part of Europe and also entitled to EU membership, which is a source of tension and conflict between Turkey and Europe. It joined NATO in 1952, and it literally bought its passage to NATO membership by sending almost 5,000 troops to Korea in 1951. And to this day, I still meet elderly Americans who have fought in Korea with Turkish troops. It also was a member of the OECD, the Organization of European Cooperation and Development, and recipient of the Marshall Fund. As a kid in the primary school, I do remember we were fed powder milk, or milk made from powder, and there was always on the boxes kind of like this from both sides with the American and Turkish flag on them. In 1963, Turkey became an associate member of the EEC, the European Economic Community, and that agreement legally, you know, whether Austrian and Sarkozy and Angela Merkel likes it or not, entitles Turkey to membership if Turkey meets the conditions. And in 1996, as a result of that agreement, Turkey signed a customs union. So Turkey is part of the European internal market as far as industrial goods go. And today, the EU is the largest trading partner of Turkey as a bloc. In 1999, it became a candidate for membership, and the 1990s was characterized by deep conflicts with all these countries, some of them coming very close to war. Very quickly, I think I have, Heidi, about 8 or 10 minutes left. Are you timing it? No? They have an interest in you timing it. Once Turkey was announced as a candidate country, it was given a list of things to do to be able to start accession negotiations, membership negotiations. Those things to do were things that Turkey needed to do to be able to meet what is known as the Copenhagen political criteria. These were dramatic demands. I mean, it included, for example, recognizing that Kurds have a separate identity and that they are entitled to broadcasting in their language and to education in that language, not to mention other reforms. So the first half of the 2000s, or the first decade of 2000, was characterized by the adoption of reforms that were as dramatic as the reforms of the early 20s. And in many ways, it forced Turkey to kind of redefine its national identity, but redefine its democracy from the early 50s. A lot has been achieved in that direction, but I am one of those people who think that the achievements are precarious. And one reason why they are precarious is that once accession negotiations started in Europe, I'm afraid there was a change of hearts. And Europe, or many European leaders, mind you, there are still many European leaders who stand behind their word and support Turkish membership and consider Turkish membership to the European Union first and foremost a plus for Europe, and only then a plus for Turkey. They are a minority. Majority politicians kind of whip public fear about Turkish barbarians and use history, this and that. They say they're poor, etc. Which things have really changed drastically in economic terms in the last three years. And that change of heart has adversely affected domestic politics in Turkey and has led to a slowdown in the reform process, if not also back sliding. That's the EU for you there. Don't know why we're stuck now. Okay. And then now, the way things are supposed to work if Turkey is to become a member of the EU is as follows. These negotiations, accession negotiations, have started. So far, out of 35 chapters, with great difficulty, with great resistance, 13 chapters have been opened. But the problem is that there are 8 chapters that have been suspended from being negotiated because of the problem over Cyprus. One of the revolutions that I saw with 2 of my eyes and kind of lived, even if on the edges of that revolution, is the change of policy in Turkey over Cyprus. From a policy that considered the solution to Cyprus conflict as having 2 separate states, to a solution that involved the 2 sides integrating. And in that context, in 2004, the Turkish government supported a UN plan to unify it and submit it to referendum. The Turkish Cypriots accepted the plan, the Greek Cypriots refused it. And the Greek Cypriots became a member of the European Union, so you can imagine the consequences, the impact that this had on the Turkish public opinion, making them convinced that after all, Europe is a Christian club that doesn't want Muslims, whether they are secular, democratic, etc. So that had a shock. But as a part of Cyprus becoming a member of the European Union, the Turkish state is obligated to open its harbors and airports, etc., include Cyprus into the customs union. The government has refused to do it. It's kind of using it as a bargaining chip, saying, you know, you treat the Turkish Cypriots better, find a solution. They said yes, the other said no, and also, you know, domestic political dynamics. And as a punishment, 8 chapters cannot be negotiated. Charming Nicolas Sarkozy one morning got up from his bed and probably had a row with Carla, decided that 5 chapters could not be open for negotiations because they were considered as chapters, if negotiated, opening the way to membership. There is only 1 chapter left that the EU can open with Turkey. Now, the concern on the Turkish side and on the side of some Europeans is what will happen then if there are no chapters that are left to negotiate. Croatia started the process the very same day as Turkey did. I wasn't able to check the list of chapters that they have opened, but they are numerous, and it's expected that by the end of this year, or at the latest by mid-year next year, Croatia will have completed its process of negotiating accession and will become a member within 2-3 years, depending on how long it takes to finalize the accession treaty, which is the 4th one. Now, the problem with the Turkish case and not Croatia is that Austria and at one point France demanded that the treaties had to be subjected to a referendum in their respective countries, which, you know, is another dark shadow on Turkey's prospects of membership. And finally, like the Congress ratifies international agreements, the European Parliament would have to do it as well. Now, public opinion, this is just some figures from 2005. Things haven't changed. If anything, they've become even worse. It shows the little support that there is for Turkish membership. Although there are some countries where support is higher, in places like Poland, Italy, Spain, compared to Holland, France, Germany. But amongst the possible future member countries, Turkey is rock bottom in terms of public opinion preferences in Europe. Yet, this is a picture of the European Parliament supporting the report by the European Commission to open negotiations with Turkey. So the mood can change from one year to another. And what I find striking in this picture is that there were many MEPs who would say evet rather than yes or we or ya in the official EU languages, and evet was chosen. So mood can change. This is Turkish level of support for membership. As you see, during the period when the reform process was taking place and EU's engagement was credible, support for EU membership in Turkey was very high, even though people were skeptical. The classic line in Turkey is, even if we meet the criteria, they wouldn't admit us. But support has been coming down. The most recent one is from a month ago, and it's come even further down, but which is even worse is that those who are against membership have come up, and now they stand at 41%. And I suspect the performance of the euro might have also played a role in that, beside the... yes, I think, Heidi, I'm pretty much done. I just want to highlight some of the challenges, political challenges, that are waiting, still facing Turkey. I must say, economically, for someone like myself, in the 70s I used to compete in the Turkish national track and field team. So that would allow us to travel abroad. And one of the first things we would do is buy ourselves a pair of jeans. Because, the other gender received us much better when we had jeans. We were more attractive. So in the early 70s there were no jeans in Turkey. And today Turkey dominates almost the jean market in the world. So financially and economically, Turkey is doing relatively well. The structural factors are in place, although unlike Russia, unlike Iran, Turkey has no natural resources, and the only way this economy can work is if it is stable, and if it has a stable neighborhood. And there are challenges, both domestic stability and region-wise. But the major challenges that bear on also economic performance are military ones, and I've just listed them. I've just passed my time, so I won't delve into the details, but if there are any questions, I can come back to them. I do have one last slide. They're concluding remarks. They will not, they'll sound familiar to you from what I have said so far. For the Turkish political system to be able to resolve those challenges and consolidate liberal democracy, I believe EU engagement is critical. But the EU is in a mess right now. Even if public attitudes were to change, I don't see how the EU could master the energy to be able to engage Turkey. So that's a challenge. The Kurdish issue, the government last July made an unbelievably bold, took an unbelievably bold step towards addressing this Kurdish problem beyond the reforms that were demanded from the EU, but, excuse my language, mucked it up. And one of the reasons why there is that violence returning is partly that. In international relations, foreign policy, again last year, there was this great hope that there would be reconciliation with Armenia. There was a lot of domestic support for it as well, international support for it, but that one got, excuse my language, mucked up as well. Domestic reasons, and the Azeris got very upset, and they managed to make it clear to Turkish public opinion that they were upset. Cyprus remains unresolved. And then you have the challenges of the Middle East. Many people have been critical of Turkish foreign policy for being partly a bit naive with zero problems. You may have the intention, but exercising it calls for other skills. And secondly, for being overconfident. And the Gaza flotilla crisis and the vote at the Security Council, some consider a reflection of that. In some ways, a reflection of Turkey going beyond its capacity to manage international relations. And then there is the challenge. This is a challenge where I think Turkey has been performing reasonably well, drawing the neighborhood into the global economy. And one way in which they've been doing is by lifting visas. They had lifted visas already as early as late 80s to even Soviet citizens in 1990. Maybe they had suspected the Soviet Union was about to collapse, and it's a risk they could have taken. But this risk was a well-taken risk, and it played a critical role in integrating Turkey with this vast Soviet world in the economic but also social, cultural sense of the word. And this government recently has put into place a similar policy towards Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and a number of other Arab countries. Heidi, thanks. You've been patient. You've listened to me. I don't know if there's still some time left for questions and answers. You're very welcome to.
Yeah, I have a question about, historically, Turkey has had conflict